So we'll just get you on the screen. Why don't you, while I'm doing that, tell us a bit about yourself? I sort of gave you a mini intro, but you can probably introduce yourself better than I can.
Yeah, so everyone, I'm AnnieKNK. I am the UK correspondent for the podcast QAnonAnonymous, and I'm also a recent PhD student. And then I recently finished my PhD, which was on digital anti-feminism and the alt-right. And just in general, I guess I'm just like a bit of a kind of conspiracy theorist, kind of far-right sort of community hobbyist. If there's somewhere nasty on the internet, I guess I kind of want to check it out.
It's a bit of an obsession, isn't it? Once you start, it's
Yeah, absolutely.
So how long? What got you interested in all that in the first place?
God, I think it's just like one of those things where I think I just always was really interested in it. I was one of those kids. I don't know if I don't know how old you are. I'm maybe kind of showing my age a bit here.
I'm
Um,
30.
you're 31. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So you'll
I'm an
probably
old
get
head.
this actually. Okay, yeah. So I was of the era where you had one computer in your house, if that really. I remember my dad, because he's a writer, had one for work, and I sort of grew up in that kind of era where your parents just don't really know what the internet is.
Mm.
So like my dad had his computer, which was for like word processing, but I kind of had just had enough savvy to understand what the internet was. And so I was kind of about like, I don't know, 10 or so. And I was kind of that kind of age where you sort of want to know what dating is like and what like being a grown up is like.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself on early pickup artist forums, although I didn't know they were called that at the time, obviously. And I was just like fascinated. I was fascinated by all of this. I obviously didn't really have like a very good understanding of kind of, I don't know, misogyny or like, far right sort of behavior. But kind of even looking back, it was very tame compared to what those spaces are like now. Kind of just guys just sort of like trading like tips on how to pick up girls and such.
Mm.
Um, and I think I found it really interesting. I thought I was sort of learning a bit what the adult world was like, and I think that interest has just always stayed with me. So from there, I kind of like went on to kind of more sort of different anti-feminist forums. Um, Eventually, I kind of found my way as a kind of teenager onto kind of white supremacist forums and stuff. And like, I want to be clear, I never considered myself a true believer. I was always skeptical.
Mm.
But I was always interested, I think, just in finding those parts of the internet where someone could have as different an opinion to me as possible.
Yeah.
I was always kind of really interested in sort of pushing myself to those places. And it was just like a weird hobby, quite honestly. Just a weird thing that I just knew tons about. I knew tons about all of these bizarre internet like places. Um, and then I eventually realized I wanted to do a PhD. And I guess I kind of had this sort of light bulb moment where I was like, hey, I know loads about all of these weird reactionary internet places that never really seemed to like come up. This was around sort of, 2015 or so.
Mm.
That just like didn't really seem to generate much interest apart from outside of kind of, I suppose, kind of Gamergate or your kind of usual like sort of harassment stories.
Mm.
But no one seemed really interested in what actually made these places tick, as opposed to kind of, just how awful they are,
Yeah.
oh, they're sending rape threats, how shocking. No one seemed really interested in, I guess, what I found the kind of really fascinating part, which is the kind of recruitment, the evolution of these places, how people are not only convinced to visit these places, but how they're convinced to stay there,
Mm.
which is what I find the really interesting part. Do you know? Because the internet is infinite options, right? You have thousands and thousands of options.
Mm.
So, what keeps you coming back to a certain place? I think I always find that a really interesting question whenever I encounter somewhere new.
That's definitely something that I found with my long experience with the internet is you do tend to end up in your own little sort of bubbles. Um,
Yeah.
which it's probably surprising to anybody who doesn't use the internet all that much. But if you're one of those people who tends to use forums or what have you, you will have a favourite forum that you go to, and that'll be your sort of general community as well, right? Online. And so you'll go to other places a lot less frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like your little family, you know, it's like your little comfort zone in a way. And I think that's true for all of us. You know, it's not necessarily a kind of something that reactionaries have harnessed about the internet. It's something that we all kind of harness in our own way.
Well, even your mum and dad probably only really go to Facebook, right? Like, that'll
Mm,
be
yeah.
their checking on what all their friends are doing and what have you. So,
Yeah.
and Facebook itself has been pretty dangerous for all this stuff as well. In the early days,
Yeah.
you're talking image boards, 4chan, what have you. You know, the quote unquote dark corners of the internet. But sort of more recently, I would say Facebook has become a real radicalizing influence.
Yeah, Facebook is something I've really kind of made an effort in the last year to watch more, to kind of pay more attention more. Because I don't know, maybe you're a bit like me on this. I honestly don't really care about Facebook. It's sort of one of those things that I like find quite useful for like this is just in my own personal life, just for I find it useful for kind of keeping in touch with old friends and stuff like
Mm,
that. But it's not it's I don't really use it, so to speak, such as unless I want to sort of like look someone up and be like, oh, I haven't spoken to that person in ages. I'll just get their number from Facebook or something like that. Um, and I think this is true for lots of, for want of a better word, the intelligentsia. I can't think of a better word to put it. But people, journalists and academics are on Twitter mostly.
mm.
And particularly people, I think, of my generation and your generation, most of us are on Twitter, or if not Twitter, something kind of Instagram or something like that. And I think
Yeah, I
this
think I
means
moved away from Facebook about 3 years ago. Bit boomer in the head,
yeah,
you know. I stayed there
yeah,
for ages because it's where all the local music events were advertised and what have you.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
that's sort of, it's like a very utilitarian place now. It's like you want to
mm,
look up a photo, you want to find an event, that stuff's really good. But I couldn't ever talk about myself as hanging out on Facebook.
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but I think that's like a real mistake actually, because when I sort of came back and made this really conscious effort to sign up to all of these kind of Facebook groups which are talking about various conspiracy theories in the UK, I was shocked at what goes on there. Like it felt like 8chan. Do you know? It felt
Mm.
like that same kind of anything goes, no moderation, particularly in the closed groups.
Oh yeah,
I
for
was like,
sure.
you know, I was stunned because it was the sort of stuff you would never ever see kind of like on Twitter. And don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
I don't think Twitter's moderation policy is brilliant. But it was kind of I was seeing these like groups which are made up of mostly mothers, I want to say, local
Mm.
mothers.
Yeah.
They were straight up sharing kind of neo-Nazi blood libel videos with one another. Um, you know, and all of this kind of really horrific stuff and taking it at complete face value. Do you know?
It's
Um,
spooky, yeah, and like you say,
Spooky, yeah.
it's not sort of your average, the kind of person you'd expect to be on an image board. It's not you know, a disenfranchised young, white dude like sitting in his bedroom, right? Like it's mums, it's dads, it's grands and grandpas, like all in
Yeah,
these closed Facebook groups, sharing some real like horrific stuff. And I think the older generation just had no immunity to this. Like I think if you grew
absolutely.
up on the internet, you had it sort of like the, it was there in the fringes like all the time, and you kind of knew like,
Mm.
oh right, that's a bad place, we don't go there because it's full of fucking Nazis.
Yeah.
But
And I
now
think
it's
you build up, it's a real skill
yeah.
to build up that kind of internet skepticism, that thing that you have where something, you know, gets put in front of you and you say, okay, is this true? Where is this coming from? And also, even now, I'm kind of talking about this skill. We don't always do it when it plays to our biases. I certainly don't. Do you know, if I see something that looks true, even then my kind of resistance is lowered, but I still have built up a little bit of skepticism.
Mm,
But I think I have like a really good example from my friend who is like not really involved in any kind of internet stuff, but her boyfriend is very into Bitcoin.
I see.
And she introduced her dad to Bitcoin.
Mm,
Um, And he has started sending her articles, being like, "Oh, I want to buy this kind of new cryptocurrency." And he'll like send her an article which looks like a BBC article, except the logo's wrong and the
Yeah.
link's wrong, and the kind of domain's wrong. And it's sort of saying,
And it's literally
everyone is,
just an advertisement. Yeah.
it's literally just an
Yeah.
advertisement. But hasn't built up that internet skepticism. To him, he sees the BBC logo and he's like, "Oh, cool, legit." And I don't sort of want to, I think, kind of like make this into it's going to necessarily be hugely generalizing,
Oh,
but I
yeah,
think
of
there is
course.
something about kind of how long you've spent on the internet and how you've got used to sorting and categorizing information, because the internet does literally change our brains.
Yeah.
It does quite literally change kind of like neural pathways, and particularly I think the more time you spent on it from a very young age. They say that, I think I saw this fascinating study which said something about how millennials and Generation Z are so much worse at retaining information than the generations above them. We have a much kind of like quicker sort of, we hear something, we kind of forget it thing than generations above us.
Very ADHD.
Yeah, very ADHD. But we're much, much better at sorting through a lot of information very quickly. And I kind of think, like, how can that not be phones and computers and the internet and stuff? Like, this study didn't draw this conclusion. It just, said this is kind of, these generations do better on these tests and older generations do better on these tests. But I was like, how can that not be an effect of the internet?
It's got to be,
You know?
right? All that information being blasted at you all at once, and you literally have to. You grow up learning and developing the skills to pass through it and see what information is relevant to you and what isn't. Yeah,
Definitely.
for sure. So you are the English correspondent for the QAnonAnonymous podcast.
I'm the UK correspondent. I'm
the UK correspondent.
I'm in charge of Wales and Scotland too.
Oh, right, an island, Northern Ireland,
Ireland,
but not the other island, the island of Ireland. They don't like being called Southern Ireland.
I was going to say, we don't want to start a whole new war over that.
But yeah, so how did you get involved with those chaps?
I think literally just from Twitter.
Yeah.
Someone I knew said, oh, this podcast that looks at conspiracy theories is looking for someone to cover the UK for them. And I was a little bit, at the time, I didn't really know all that much about QAnon, to be honest with you. But I obviously knew a lot about the far right and the internet and how the two of those things together can combine to create truly horrific things. So I got in touch with him and I sort of said a bit like, look, I honestly don't think QAnon, this was back in kind of 2018. I think I said, look, I honestly don't think QAnon in the UK is that interesting.
Yeah.
But I think we have our whole culture of really interesting kind of like conspiracy theories and kind of far right sort of manias, and kind of far right and how that connects with media culture and everything, that I think will be really interesting. And they went for it. I think the first segment I ever did for them, it's like 20 minutes, was just about like Nigel Farage and of like,
yeah.
I know, yeah, and just all the like various kind of kind of his like appearances on like Alex Jones and stuff like that, and how he's like both a kind of politician who's in, the kind of EU Parliament, but also is like very much part of this kind of internet ecosphere of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, very much sort of he bridges the gap.
It's
always bizarre to me when I see Nigel. I think he was on stage with Donald Trump in a rally yesterday. Just bigging up the president, talking about how great he is, and it's always really bizarre to me watching him over. And you'll see on Twitter all the Brits are answering to the posts saying, "Oh, we're sorry, we don't know how he got out," etc. But like, because I don't know, I think, yeah, we're very split on how seriously the country takes Farage. Like, you either love him or you think he's an absolutely useless buffoon and a hopeless racist. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we really have this problem in our culture of like wanting to make, I think the people who don't take Farage seriously are almost more at fault than the people who do. Do you know,
Mm.
than the people who do and who love him? Because it's the people who don't take Farage seriously who put him on like Question Time 50 bloody
Yeah.
times, however many it is, because they're like, oh, he's great value. He's so entertaining. Do you know, he
Yeah.
always says he's so rude, he's so cheeky. Do you know? And that is kind of actually what makes him a celebrity
Mm.
more than, kind of someone who is what the leader of a party which has like no seats in parliament should ever really like. He got so much more airtime than, kind of like other parties of similar
Yeah.
kind of stature,
Parties that have
you know?
seats, like the Green Party, for example. You know,
Yeah,
how often do you see
exactly.
Carolyn Lucas on Question Time? I mean,
Yeah.
she's been on there, but, nowhere near as much as Farage, I shouldn't
No,
think.
when I was researching that segment, I think I found out that he was the second most invited guest apart from Anne Widdecombe.
Good
Um,
God. And that's
yeah.
that's a duo, isn't it?
But it does go to show you, I think, how these kind of how the British media culture is really kind of complicit in
Mm.
a lot of this, in kind of creating them to be sort of these kind of funny, jovial characters. And it's like
Yeah.
you are giving them a platform, you are giving them this huge reach that they would never have had. And I think the worst part is you're making them into like a character, do you know?
Mm.
Like to someone who's a bit funny and who's going to say something a bit like, I don't know, a bit racy.
Yeah. Well,
When actually they shouldn't.
the media always has been pretty complicit. Our papers, we don't
Mm,
really, for anybody who's American watching, we don't really have any mainstream left-wing papers apart from perhaps The Guardian, and even The
yeah.
Guardian's put its foot in it quite a few times.
Mm,
Um, and the media's always been pretty complicit. I think back to sort of, everything from like 28, the current sort of like trans panic hysteria, the do you remember the Trojan horse scandal? The whole Islam's trying to infiltrate schools in Birmingham to
wow.
teach them Sufi Islam, etc. Yeah, Michael Gove set up an investigation into schools to yeah,
Wow.
and of course the grooming gangs thing, right, which
Mm,
is huge among the British far right. Like all of that has been sort of like pushed and very very heavily by our media, I feel, because they're just like, oh, this
absolutely.
is interesting, let's glomp onto it, we can make a lot of money from it. I mean, you
And
can talk about ideological motivations, because it's most of our papers are sort of like Murdoch owned, or at least owned by some billionaire off in another country. But I think most of it is just like, here's an exciting story, let's go at it, with no sense of responsibility for platforming.
definitely. And I think, yeah, that's something that like always really frustrates me when you kind of talk about media complicity. People,
Mm.
someone will always say, oh, so, you think that, all the kind of newspaper people are kind of, sat there together, oh, how shall we make this country more right wing? And you're sort of like, actually, it doesn't have to be that at all. It's about the profit incentive, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's strange is it almost feels like people understand that when it comes to the internet, do you know?
Mm.
So something I'll often talk about when I'm interviewed for various newspapers or something like that is, I'll always say is that one thing to remember is that conspiracy theories are profitable, and
Mm.
they're profitable for the people who sell them, and they're profitable to the social medias like platforms that host them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, no one thinks, Mark Zuckerberg really wants you to be an anti-vaxxer.
Mm.
When you say that, no one thinks that. Like,
Yeah.
they understand that it's purely about making money. But it's almost when you kind of get into kind of, newspapers or, kind of TV channels, then suddenly people have this kind of resistance where they're sort of, saying that
Mm.
you're kind of, claiming there's a conspiracy when you're not. So much of it is just
Yeah.
financially motivated.
I think we see this in academia, in online discourse, like just in pretty much anything. If a new subject comes up,
Mm,
somebody will write an article, or somebody will even just on Twitter, right? Somebody will make a Twitter post, and then if it's controversial enough, if it stokes enough emotion or conversation or what have you, everybody will want to have their say and will want to
mm,
try and present different takes on it and get different people involved, even with no monetary incentive, even with
mm.
only sort of social capital as the incentive.
Yeah,
So I think you can definitely see this with like pretty much anything that comes up that's sort of vaguely controversial, and
Yeah.
there's no thought put into it. It's just sort of, it's a feeding frenzy, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And I think this is something I try and I fail with my own social media to become more responsible with, I think, to sort of understand when someone's trying to wind you up, when someone's trying to get 100 quote tweets or whatever, of people saying, this is ridiculous, this is stupid,
Yeah.
Um, and quite honestly, I don't always respond well. I sometimes do just like, quote tweet. Um, because I'm mad because they wound me up.
That's totally fair.
But I'm trying, I think, to become better with it because, as you say, it is just an economy. You
Yeah.
know, they've deliberately, structured that tweet in the most inflammatory way possible
Yeah.
to kind of court that response because they know it means more eyeballs, because they know it means more followers. And they know if they've got, like, say, a YouTube channel or a Patreon or something, all they need is that one extra person. It's kind of, the attention economy essentially at work.
Yeah, literally. Just what I'm doing right now. I come on, I talk to people, we have conversations, and
Yeah,
hopefully
I
they're
mean,
interesting and get some good information out there. But ultimately, like, I think anybody who makes any kind of content on the internet, from, like, from a Twitter post to like a 4 hour long YouTube video, like, we're all doing it because we
we're
want
all
some
subject
eyes
to
on it, right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have the same with the podcast. Like, I pick stuff that I know people will be interested in or
Mm.
intrigued by, because I am a massive narcissist and want people to hear what I have to
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely in this space, it's been a lot harder for me, I think, to break in because I do keep getting distracted by the conversations that are going on in the space on Twitch. And
say.
not a lot of people are interested in sort of like cultic extremism and so on.
Yeah,
But
I don't know. I feel like they are. I think this is
yeah,
a great topic to do on Twitch. I think people are really intrigued by it. I think we
yeah,
all have that sort of curiosity. The thing I described from when I was 10, of, wanting to understand how
mm.
people can think so differently from yourself, I think is
I
a very
say that
human.
all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh,
I've never heard anybody express it like exactly like that before.
mm,
I've always said it's like, if somebody thinks so differently from me, that's something I can't abide, because there's sort of this wall that comes up
mm,
in my ability to empathize with them, right?
yeah.
Because I can't fully understand them. I can't put myself in their shoes and like know where they're coming from. And so their
Mm,
actions and their beliefs and the things they say and do, they come across as entirely unreasonable. And yet I know that human beings, like, we all have our own kind of internal logic, and as long as you can
yeah.
understand somebody else's internal logic, you'll be able to see where they're coming from. But it's just that is the sort of puzzle that gets me all the time with everything from far right
Yeah.
extremists to serial
You
killers to cults. Yeah.
Yeah, you get desperate to get inside their head, right?
Mm.
I think that's a really, like, um, common feeling, definitely. So, kind of, what conspiracy? Sorry, I'm turning the interview around on you.
No,
What other
no.
conspiracy theories do you, like, cover, or have you covered on this channel?
Well, I mean, I had to take a break for a little while because I had a personal bereavement and stuff, but I've just
Mhm.
come back, and I'm sort of refocusing the channel towards just doing interviews with like cult researchers and extremist researchers and so on, to talk about the things that I'm like most interested in.
Mhm.
But on other channels and on panels and all sorts of stuff, I've talked about everything from sort of the Order of Nine Angles to QAnon, basically. So
Oh, cool.
that whole gamut from skull mask fuckery to new age wine mum, Ashtar
Mhm.
Sharan, you know, all that stuff. Yeah. But it's just yeah. I guess I throw stuff out there to see of what kind of sticks and what people actually get kind of drawn in and interested by. Um, Me personally, I've been particularly fascinated with QAnon now for about 7-8 months. I've spent a lot of
Mhm.
time in sort of Zoom calls and Discords and Facebook groups and so
And
on.
we're probably in
Yeah.
the same ones. We should wave to each other.
I suppose it doesn't matter now because they've taken down their Discord, so I can say I've been in the Patriot Soapbox Discord for quite a while now.
Oh,
And
nice.
I'm just trying to work out how to ethically release any kind of footage that I have, because obviously
Mm,
I don't want to be showing people's faces. I'm
mm,
trying to decide like whether it's reasonable to like use voice changes or whatever. But I
mm,
think there's some really interesting incidents that happened
mm.
during my time in there that I want to get out there. But anyway, it's not about me. um, yeah. So QAnon, you come at it from the UK angle, although I imagine you're probably like me, just as interested in the United States sort of angle of things. Recently, there was a report by Hope Not Hate that sort of covered the length and breadth of UK QAnon, and they made some pretty fantastic claims. I haven't read the report itself in full yet.
Mm.
I've read bits and pieces and I've read a couple of articles about it. But there's been some pretty fantastical claims circulating over the last couple of days. Things like, what is it? 1 in 4 adults in the United Kingdom believe in a conspiracy theory connected to QAnon.
Mm.
What do you think about sort of QAnon and its spread in the UK? Do you think that that's likely an accurate statistic, and if it is, what do you think are the implications?
So I think it is probably quite likely, purely because QAnon, I think its real strength as a conspiracy theory is how it has consumed and unfurled itself into all these other conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, become almost the kind of the meta conspiracy theory. And it's kind of got all this stuff. So, like it's like, oh, you believe in kind of the JFK assassination, kind of, not being Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah, we'll like fold you into the conspiracy
Yeah,
theory.
that
You're
was the
kind of
deep state. Yeah.
yeah, you're an
Mm.
anti-vaxxer. Yeah, we think vaccines are pretty sus as well. Come into the fold, do you know? And I think so. I find it very believable because most people do believe in a conspiracy
Mm.
theory. I've got mine. I believe in, do you know?
Mm.
And I think that QAnon has been really adept, and it's been its kind of strength in creating this kind of
Mm.
lasting community has been in the way that it unfolds like a story. There's always new updates, there's always new developments and what the deep state is doing and what Donald Trump is doing to stop them. And it's very, very good at subsuming pretty much every other conspiracy theory going into its narrative, do you know?
Mm.
So I find it quite believable to say that, like, 1 in 4 adults believe in a conspiracy theory related to QAnon, because it's actually, I think at this point, harder to think of a conspiracy theory that isn't related to QAnon by now, that some
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of
I mean, it's
intrepid.
all there on the Deep State Mapping Project, right?
Yeah,
Like, pretty much
I mean
everything is connected in that beautiful mind map.
that's what's great about the deep state. It
Mm.
goes deep. Do you know? It's like it kind of doesn't stop at just one incident. It's
Mm.
all of them. Um, so yeah, I think I can definitely believe that. Although I'd be intrigued to see kind of, how they're mapping those connections.
Yeah. I mean, I fully recommend reading the whole report, even though I haven't done so yet. But, but yeah, Hope Not Hate. Go check out that stuff. I know some people have dodgy opinions about Hope Not Hate, but I think that they do a lot of good work.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
big organisation, and everybody makes mistakes sometimes. But yeah, it's I think they do a lot of good work, and I think this report's incredibly interesting. Um, Geez, so for I mean, we went straight into QAnon without even giving any kind of like overview of what it is. I don't know how many people watching this will really need that overview after what we've been through, but just for those who are sort of like new or who might come to the YouTube video later, can you give it like a very brief overview of like what QAnon is?
Yeah, so QAnon is a conspiracy theory, or I guess as we were discussing, more of a kind of conspiracy network at this point. which at its kind of heart, its central nucleus sort of says that Donald Trump is doing battle with something called the deep state, which is various kind of democratic operatives, kind of security services, and this kind of thing, to, I suppose, even not to kind of, to stop them from doing kind of unnamed sort of crimes,
Mm.
be they kind of corruption, or has become like a bit more of a popular narrative. It's just that bit more exciting. Um, Pedophilia and kind of satanic rituals and this sort of thing. And it kind of holds that Donald Trump was not supposed to win the 2016 election. The deep state had not planned for this. And now, when he kind of speaks of draining the swamp, this is essentially a call to action to kind of put Hillary Clinton. Gosh, there's such a huge list now of the people they want to indict and execute and things like this.
Yeah, it's
Hillary Clinton,
huge.
Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner, pretty much anyone involved in the Democratic Party.
Mm.
A lot of kind of Hollywood celebrities as well, for some reason. We're all kind of part of the deep state, and that there is going to be a great awakening, which they call it, which is the day when all of these people's crimes are uncovered to the public, and they will all be summarily punished, essentially.
Yeah. And the punishments range from sort of imprisonment to being hung from lampposts, right? Being sent away to Gitmo, or
I
and
don't know if you saw that they've like, I don't know, some sort of strand of QAnon. My co-host Travis,
yeah,
they did a whole thing where they said that he had already been sent to Gitmo.
yeah.
Like, we're just pretending that he's still here because he's actually locked up.
And I love that, because that's one of the ways. I say I love that. I hate it because
I
it's one of the ways in which they can just make any prediction or statement and say that it's come true. I mean, this all started from a post in October of 2017 on 4chan, saying that, that was it literally that weekend, basically, that Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested, and that all these preparations were in place to stop her from fleeing the country. And of course that never happened, but there's always that get out clause of like, oh yeah, but it did happen,
Yeah.
and this is a clone, or like,
I'll look at the
yeah.
scene.
Some of the more reasonable ones say, oh well, he wasn't talking about October the 20th of that year, it could have been any year, right? But yeah, so I mean, that's one of the disturbing things about it, is that it seems to resist any kind of critique, because no matter how fantastical the answer might have to be to explain it away, it's nowhere near as fantastical as the core beliefs anyway. So pretty much anything is believable, I feel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's this, yeah, I've had a glass of wine and now I've forgotten the name of the phenomenon. But there's a phenomenon where it says that the more evidence someone is shown to disprove their belief, the more they'll believe it.
Yeah.
And I have absolutely no doubt that I do this like hundreds of times a day, do you know, without even noticing it. I'm sure that someone shows me something that, kind of, I mean, in fact, I guess my research is the perfect example. I've been shown, thousands and thousands of kind of pieces of people disputing my beliefs. One thing you can say about me is I definitely don't like live in a bubble. I like try and go and find people who like have the exact opposite of my beliefs. And yeah, I am still kind of left wing. I am feminist.
Yeah.
Do you know? So I must be doing that a little bit as well. I must be seeing stuff that kind of I struggle with, or that, kind of, makes me kind of sort of understand that my argument isn't as kind of simple as I think it is. And yet I still believe my arguments, do you know? So I'm kind of not like saying this is a kind of, when I say, QAnon is the more proof they're shown, the more they believe in QAnon. I'm not kind of saying this is kind of, an ivory tower looking down on, those kind of.
No, it's just how humans work.
Yeah, I think it is just kind of how humans work. It's very understandable in that sense. It's understandable, especially I think if this is something you are really counting on. Do you
Mm.
know? If you've staked a lot of time and effort in this, then you desperately need it to be true.
Yeah.
It's not just that you want it to be. Human life is so precious, and you stake so much of that on that thing. You need it to be true at this
Yeah.
point.
Also, why would you pay a lot of attention to? It's that whole thing about passing information again, right? And I think it is kind of like a fault in the way people pass information. But if you know something to be true, why are you going to be paying attention to all the mad people who say it isn't? Right? Like,
Yeah.
just from our point of view, right? Like, obviously we're interested in the people who believe things that are very different from us. But if it's not a subject that we're interested in, then we're probably not going to be paying much attention to it. I don't pay much attention to like what the Conservative Party says here in the UK, for example, because bollocks to them, basically. I already know what they're about, and I whatever they say, they're not going to have my vote. So, yeah, exactly. So why should I spend a huge amount of time listening to their campaign promises unless it sort of links in with something else I'm researching?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's something they are expecting that disagreement. I went to a Save the Children, and I guess again I should probably do a little spiel that Save the Children
Mm,
is, I suppose, what my co-host Travis calls the soft front of QAnon,
yeah.
which sort of specifically focuses on the alleged kind of elite paedophilia that is happening with aforementioned deep state Democratic Party operatives. And in the UK, it's kind of diffused a little bit and become a bit more kind of nationalistic.
Mm,
Um, but when I was at that rally in London, which was Save the Children, people, when they were doing speeches and stuff, were constantly, saying, who here's been called a conspiracy theorist? And everyone puts that hand up. Do you know? They, or, don't, saying stuff like, don't worry, people are going to call you crazy. People are going to say, what's wrong with you? They are like not only anticipating those reactions, but they're kind of priming one another for them. Do you know?
yeah. Yeah.
When someone does that, what they're saying is like, don't let it hurt you, don't let it stop you. Do
Mm,
you are on the right track here.
yeah. Don't pay any
um
attention. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's perfectly reasonable. And I think that's one of the important things to remember when dealing with these things, because I think, oh Lord, one of the questions I imagine you also get asked all the time is like, how do you get somebody who's fallen into this out?
mm,
My answer is always, you have to treat it like an abusive relationship. Basically, you can't pressure them because it'll push
yeah.
them deeper into it, and it might widen the gap between you. It'll break your
mm,
relationship, and then where are you to help them out? And you can't do that whilst constantly criticizing and mocking somebody, I feel.
yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, one thing I would add to that is, um at least from my own kind of anecdotes. So I should say, when I was doing my PhD, I interviewed a lot of men, young men who were either in the alt-right or had exited the alt-right. And one thing I found really fascinating was how many of their stories matched one another
Mm,
when it came to getting out. And one thing I think I've always learned from this is that online argument is pretty much useless. That pretty
mm,
much never changes anyone's mind.
yeah.
Nearly all of the young men who had got out described one-to-one interactions with people they knew in real life,
Mm,
or very close internet relationships. So not the kind where you're just like tweeting at one another, the kind where
yeah.
every day and stuff like that, which I think is almost the same thing. When you're in that kind of close internet-based friendship with someone, you may as well know them in real life.
Mm,
But I guess this is a real relationship. It's not just someone yelling at them on Twitter, basically. It's not just someone kind of mocking them or saying you're stupid or whatever. Um,
what do you think of the credibility given to the idea that sort of some of these larger sort of left-wing and anti-far right kind of internet personalities that have debates with sort of far-right figures can, through those performances, help to de-radicalize and sway people? We were talking to Caleb Kane the other day, who describes that as his path out of the alt-right, basically. Do you think that there's a lot of credibility to that approach as well?
So I think it's a tough one, because one thing I am always really anti is this kind of like slightly magical thinking about debate, which is that, good arguments always triumph over bad ones. And actually, I just straight up don't think that's true. I think debates are really fun, and I watch debates which have, excuse me, I've watched debates which have certainly like made me kind of reconsider certain preconception I've had. But I don't think they're the kind of be-all and end-all of the kind of political landscape. I think lots of people have this kind of very sort of like naive idea that, you watch argument A and you watch argument B, and you, as a totally rational human actor, simply choose the best one. And kind of this is just like never really watched history.
No.
Kind of don't feel like,
Well, we see that the fan person will think that their man won the argument, and the fans of the other person will think that, and there's very little sort of shifting, at least immediately after the debate, that we can see.
I mean, having said that, I'm not saying on an individual level it doesn't probably happen. Do you know? I'm sure it does. I guess I am just always leery of kind of using debate as the answer, because I think in so many people's kind of minds or kind of political understandings, it already is. Debate is always the answer.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't think it works. I'm sure it does kind of, on an individual level. But I don't think it's kind of going to mass de-radicalize people, because I kind of think if it could, it would have done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We've had these debates going on for years. Well, why isn't everyone just on the same page now? But they're not. So I think, I'm sure it happens. And I think there are some really competent debaters out there on the kind of left-wing side of things who I like really admire and I love to watch, because I find them so exciting and really intriguing kind of like political speakers in a way I could never be. But I do kind of like still think of it as entertainment primarily, because I think that is what it is.
So okay, let's geek out a little bit, all right? Let's QAnon, the latest happenings. We've had we're in the storm now, apparently, pretty much, right? Obviously the election's like right around the corner, and that's an extremely big event for those people who think that Trump's about to usher in the millennium. And we've had some huge information, big monstrous information about Hunter Biden. This is something that's confusing me, actually, quite a lot, because I kind of, after seeing Frazzle Drip, which, I mean, I didn't see Frazzle Drip, not the actual video. Nobody has, because it probably doesn't exist. But after watching people talk about Frazzle Drip, I understand that QAnon were obviously going to say something along the lines of, well, toppers, images of Hunter Biden torturing and raping children on it, right? Which predictably they've gone all out and basically stated. And in fact, Rudy Giuliani alluded to it on Fox News the other day, that he was at least engaged in sexual activity with underage children. But so far from what I've seen, none of the leaks are like hugely worth getting excited about. I watched a video from a Q chap the other day where he was going through all the information and the Bobulinski interview as well. Bobulinski was somebody who purportedly worked with Hunter Biden, who had an interview with Tucker Carlson the other day. So he was going through all this information. He had a big old whiteboard and he was doing all this like beautiful mind stuff, just trying to link it up. It was very interesting watching his thought process as he's like trying to work out like where's the crime here? How can I link this into like something really, really? So I I'm still at a complete loss. Can you explain Hunter's laptop and why it's such a huge thing to me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Hunter's laptop is almost just like the new Frazzle Drip, right?
Mm,
Everyone claims to have seen something worse, or they claim to, um, or they claim to know of something worse on there that can't be
mm,
released because it's just simply too awful. But at the same time, I'm kind of with you. I've like looked at, some kind of like videos from it, and they all kind of seem like, um, yeah, like like kind of embarrassing stuff that kind
yeah,
of like young guy has on his phone that is probably kind of like a bit of a faux pas for someone whose father is running for president. I think there's like one of like kind of drug use, or he's smoking a joint or something like that in it.
yeah.
Um, and I think there's one where it's like nudes or whatever. The website I saw had
Oh,
them
yeah.
tastefully blurred out. So, but they all look like adults
I mean,
in
she
it. From what,
seems really, really happy as well. This doesn't seem like non-consensual. Yeah, I mean, it's all right. We talk about it in lower detail here anyway. Um, so yeah, Hunter Biden getting a foot job, and I didn't watch much of it because I was like, I watched a couple of seconds to be like, is this Hunter interacting with an underage girl, basically? And pretty quickly it was apparent that it wasn't. But before I clicked off the video, about 15 seconds in, she says, "Wow, I didn't know my foot could do that," and has a little laugh. And I'm just like, there's nothing like this is genuinely kind of wholesome, right? Like it's just two people who clearly enjoy each other's company, hanging out on the bed, enjoying their afternoon. Like, and there's nothing. It just seems very wholesome. And in addition to that, like the texts from Biden to Hunter, while he's in rehab and he's talking about how proud he is of his son for like trying to beat this and he's trying to be
oh, I
supportive.
didn't
I
see
don't even
those.
like Biden that much, but after seeing those, I was like, wow,
I'm like,
actually, you know
look
what? Yeah,
at
that's cool.
that.
Nice one, Joe. Yeah. So yeah, so you think like it's unless of course more information comes out. Tucker Carlson and Rudy Giuliani both say they have a lot of information that they're gonna be dumping. Um,
Yeah, I think so.
Rudy
And
Giuliani's always talking about his big dumps that he's got coming.
I'm a left-wing feminist. I'm never gonna be like, oh, that rich guy is totally innocent of all sexual wrongdoing. I just
Yeah.
I it's not that I'm saying that he's not, but I just,
Mm,
who knows? I'm not about to
yeah.
I'm not about to die on that hill.
Mm,
But from what I've seen, there didn't seem to be anything. There
yeah.
certainly seemed to be. I think, probably 10 years ago would have been real election ruining. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
almost the stakes are raised now, and sex scandals just have to get
Yeah.
worse and worse. It's like
Yeah.
kind of not enough now that, like, I don't know, a politician has a mistress. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I mean,
also,
once you've been in office, like all bets are off, aren't they? Really? I mean, we're talking
well,
about a man with multiple mistresses, multiple divorces.
yeah,
Yeah.
the kind of QAnonification of politics, I think, means that it always has to go in this direction. So maybe something will come out. I'm like,
Mm,
as I say, I'm kind of like largely skeptical of
yeah.
kind of wealthy men and their proprietary around women. I worked as a waitress for a while in a
Mm.
very well-to-do hotel.
Oh, good
Um,
God.
yeah, lots of lawyers, lots of politicians and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm never exactly going to let them off the hook.
Mm.
I know how they behave, but
That's
that's not to
definitely the
say.
thing we've got to impress upon anybody who's sort of skeptical about this stuff is like, both of us are left wing feministy types, right? And both of us are very, very skeptical of men with power. And neither of us, I think, would be particularly surprised to find out that Hunter Biden was involved in some sort of sexual impropriety, or even outright assault or what have you. And if the evidence was there, we'd believe it. Yeah.
I'm a victim if a victim came forward, absolutely, do you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I am skeptical of Rudy Giuliani's kind of his kind of leaking sort of content here.
Yeah.
That's not quite the same thing, and I think it's being quite sort of deliberately played to the QAnon crowd, who are, of course,
Yeah.
all, um, acting as
And
if this
that's
is.
what's spooky, I think, is that we're definitely seeing a lot more of that from people connected to the GOP in high positions where they're deliberately playing to the QAnon crowd now. Um,
Yeah, I find that really alarming. It's kind of, it's very. So I was interviewed for the Times Radio. This was a while back, maybe even a couple of months ago by now. But I was interviewed for the Times Radio, and they said they wanted to talk about QAnon. So you sort of say, hey, okay, I can give you an explainer of what that's about. This was when the UK media had really only just started to pay attention. So I expected it to be quite a bit of, the basic questions: what is QAnon? And they had Imran Ahmed, who is the CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which is a really cool organization that do like a lot of interesting work on reports on this stuff. And then it seems to have just like this random Republican guy who, as far as I could tell, like had no kind of like connection in terms of this. And he said the thing that I later heard all Republicans say when they're asked about QAnon. He said, well, I really don't know a lot about it. Um, you know, I think, this has all just kind of been blown up by the media. And then he kind of said the thing that, that like Donald Trump would later go on to say, being like, I can't see how it's bad for democracy. They're just a bunch of people who want to save democracy. Like, I'm not saying I agree with all of their claims, but
yeah.
how can that be so bad? And I was kind of like, oh wow, this is just like the Republican Party playbook from now on. And
Yeah.
since then, I've heard so many Republican politicians say the exact same thing, and I'm like, you're all getting this. You're all getting this script from
Yeah.
someone, just like kind of perfect sort of. Oh, I'm not really sure what that is. I mean,
Yeah.
especially I was like, well, why did you come on to an interview about it then? Why did you come onto a panel to say, oh no, I don't
Don't
follow
really
that?
know much about it. They seem like nice people. They like me. Yeah. Yeah. And that's that's the thing, isn't it? They like Trump. They are GOP voters, right? And they're probably, most of them, very highly motivated voters as well. I know I definitely fell into this category, but maybe even as early as like about 6 months ago, I think I was thinking there's gonna come a breaking point where a large portion of the GOP says this shit is fucking insane. It's dangerous. We need to make sure we disassociate from this because it will ruin us in the future. And I still believe that it probably will ruin them, but there just hasn't been that outpouring of like, we need to reject QAnon. And I think the moment the president stood up on stage and
like voices, but it's not like a God, I was about to say like a cabal. It's not like a collective,
yeah, just a few disparate voices, yeah. And I think the moment that the president stood up on stage and basically said, oh, I don't really know what that is, they seem to like me, is there anything so bad about wanting to, combat sex trafficking? That was it. There was never going to be an effective resistance from the GOP against QAnon, at least until after Trump is out of office. I'm hoping that if Trump election, that will be one of the effects, is that QAnon will be sort of expunged from the GOP, but it's definitely not a certainty.
Yeah, I mean, like, you hope so, but in a way, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about. How anything and everything that could happen simply proves their argument. So you can definitely see, the deep state took Donald Trump down. This proves what we were all along. He was on track to win the 2020 election, and they saw their chance to get rid of him.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I wasn't saying that, like, if Trump gets voted out, QAnon will die. I was just saying, I hope that if Trump gets voted out, then the GOP will push it out of the party at least. Yeah.
I mean, again, but if it works for them electorally, I
Yeah.
don't think they will. Do you know? I think if they can be like, look what they did to our president, do you know?
Yeah.
There can be this kind of almost like that kind of lost cause sort of um that lost cause kind of romance, you know. He was martyred, even though he's like still just a rich guy living incredibly
Yeah.
well. Do you know?
And a lot of the
Um,
big commentators have already kind of bought in anyway, right? You know, Tucker Carlson's been talking about the deep state forever.
mm,
You know, OAN. They, you know, I don't, yeah, you're probably right. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. Damn. I'm usually so doomer, and the one time I try and be optimistic, you just shoot me down. Yeah,
well, I mean, like,
QAnon's probably not going anywhere.
I'm just saying I could see that happening. I'm not saying it definitely will. And who knows? Like,
Mm,
yeah, I definitely feel like I was totally wrong in my prediction of how QAnon would play out in the UK. You
yeah.
know, I really thought it would kind of really appeal to the sort of traditional far right groups. You have kind of,
Mm,
Bobby Robinson, EDL, kind of make it all about Rotherham. And there's been like hints of that, definitely.
yeah.
But I really underestimated the Facebook mums, you know,
Mm.
and of who
I
would
think
come
we
out.
all did, honestly. The Facebook mums are a power to be reckoned with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um. All right. So, what's happening in the QAnon sphere that has you like interested right now? It's
Now, what's really interesting me is this huge wedge that's happening. This wedge issue in UK QAnon communities, so Save the Children groups,
mm-hmm,
the ones that are left after the recent Facebook wipe um, over the free school meals issue. I find this
mm,
really fascinating because it's not a set, they're not decided on it at all. And in fact, it's
mm,
been a rift over the last week or so within these groups where they are having incredibly nasty fights over whether free
mm,
school meals is good, whether, protesting, Conservative Party HQs, local
mm,
protests, which put out empty plates. I don't know if you've seen this. They,
mm,
they like litter empty plates all over the kind of garden of these HQs and stuff like that. You know, it's been really fascinating to see the political divide in these groups.
yeah.
And
So
so bad.
for context, recently the Tories struck down a vote to the Tories being the Conservative Party here in the United Kingdom struck down a vote to give children free school meals during the holidays because of the pandemic and how strapped families are for cash, and this has caused a pretty huge outcry even among a lot of like quite right wing people, because they just see it as sort of cruelty for cruelty's sake. You know, why not feed children who otherwise probably aren't going to be able to eat. Um, and at least from what I gather, UK QAnon is usually quite supportive of the Conservative Party. Correct?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I think yeah, they have this funny sort of thing where they don't have this usually. They're not as partisan as QAnon in the US are by
Mm,
any means. Um, but having said that, they definitely have this element in them, which is kind of very pro Brexit, very anti EU, and therefore kind of falls with the Conservative Party,
yeah.
and it's very anti Labour, which kind of sort of puts you on the Conservative Party side, whether they kind of really feel an affinity to Conservatives or not. But this has really, really divided this group, and it's
Mm,
actually, yeah, they had kind of, the Facebook moderators being like, guys, we are hanging on by a thread here when it comes to not getting, wiped by Facebook. Please,
mm,
please stop, stop calling each other names and stuff like that. It very much didn't feel like a settled issue. It didn't feel like something that the groups came down one side or another on. Lots and lots of very impassioned posts on both sides. I think one thing I found really interesting was the kind of anti-free school meals side, which I guess is just like rhetorically the harder side, I think, on in that debate,
mm,
because you're literally arguing against giving food to kids, which is, you know, generally a bit of a kind of like a straightforward kind of sympathy, kind of lean.
mm,
They'd say, well, I just don't understand why we can get this amount of political action for this, but not for the paedophiles, you know.
mm.
I found that like so interesting because I was a bit like, what should people do about the pedophiles? Like being a pedophile is already illegal, do you
Mm,
know? Like who do you protest in that case? Um, but I guess yeah, it was I think that clash of the people who have got sucked into Save the Children because of, I think, this genuine, quite righteous anger at kind of these historic child sexual abuse scandals, which often
mm,
we only find out sort of 10 years, 15 years too late, um, and the kind of cover ups that are involved. And, people who, really do just kind of hate to think of people hurting children, which is,
yeah.
a pretty broadly sympathetic issue. Um, and I think the people who, and I guess this is kind of where I see the sort of like fascist kind of underpinnings to this theory, who are more interested in children as symbols of purity than they
Mm.
are in children as human beings. Do you
Yeah,
know?
more as sort of tools in the narrative that the opponent is evil, i.e.,
Yeah,
the worst possible thing you can do is sort of torture and sexually molest a child,
yeah.
and therefore the child becomes the prop in the story that makes that other person the ultimate evil. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I found this really interesting because these people are saying why aren't they bothered about pedophiles? And I was just a bit like I mean surely if you're bothered about children being sexually abused, which I certainly am, I'm
Mm.
sure most people are, then you should also be bothered. It sort of feels quite natural that you should be bothered about them starving, about
Mm.
them going hungry, but that's not a natural following. That seems like such a natural kind of like logical step, but it isn't necessarily. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It depends on why you care about the pedophilia. Yeah. Is it that you care about demonizing the supposed pedophile, or is it that you care about looking
Is it
after the child?
more like kind of, yeah? Is the pedophile more the source of aggression and hatred for you than the child that needs to be rescued? Do you know? Is that the most important part of the theory for you? And basically, what I seem to find was that it was quite literally 50-50. I could not ascertain a dominant position. I
Yeah.
would maybe say more people on the pro free school meal side, but it definitely did not feel like a settled question at all. And I found that really fascinating in terms of how QAnon is interacting uh, you know, with political stories, mainstream political stories as they come out.
That's that is fascinating. Like how new issues that pop up within the movement, especially ones that cause division, can help give us greater insight into sort of the mindset of the people within that sort of. I hesitate to call it a movement. I much prefer calling it a cult, and sometimes I'll be really provocative and just call it a neo-Nazi death cult. But which I think is perfectly defensible. I mean, rehashed blood libel, millenarianism, bam,
Yeah,
neo-Nazi death cult.
quite
But
often called like a nascent fascist street movement, Um,
nascent fascist street movement.
yeah.
I've heard that
Um,
in reference to sort of like Proud Boys and things like that, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that in reference to QAnon.
well, I think it really is. I think especially in the UK, I think that's really where it's heading.
Mm,
Because, people will often say, do you think that it's going to have the same sort of play with political, with politicians here? And quite honestly, no, I don't. But I
mm,
do think that it seems that the rallies for Save the Children, and particularly when they're merging with the anti-coronavirus or sort of COVID skeptic, anti-lockdown movements are growing. They're
mm-hmm,
getting big, which is incredibly hard to do. Anyone who's ever been to a protest or, or counter protest or anything like that will know that keeping momentum up is really hard. Quite often, what happens is your first one, you have great numbers, second one, less numbers,
mm,
But actually, it definitely seems to be that with Save the Children, the numbers are growing,
yeah,
um, which is, I think, quite significant in terms of what it means politically.
mm,
Um, because I think that means that it's not going away essentially, and we don't have the American, whatever you call it, we don't have the kind of American climax of the election really
yeah.
to give us this kind of make or break, or this will change things. I can't like see us getting that relief in a similar way. So yeah. I think of it as a street movement, and I think, as you kind of pointed out, it absolutely has these pretty strong fascist underpinnings. Whether
Yeah.
it's we can often get fooled by the fact it's mostly women, it's mothers, but we shouldn't, I think.
So we've been going for about an hour now, and one of the advantages of this platform is that I can, because it's sort of streamed live, I can just pull random people in to ask questions if they want to. Would you be willing to take a couple of questions from viewers if that's? It's totally all right for you to say no. I know it puts you on the spot. I don't think anyone would feel bad. All right. So I'm just going to plug the Discord in the chat. If anybody would like to ask Annie a question, join the Discord and get into the Green Room voice channel, and I'll pull you in so you can ask your question. In the meantime, you said that the United States, and this is going to be one of those questions that I'm sure you get asked a lot because it's one that I get asked a lot as well. The United States has this sort of like climax point coming with the election, which is only like 4 or 5 days away now. Good Lord. Oh, Christ. I'm talking to Poker Politics next Wednesday, so that's going to be an interesting conversation post-election, I'm sure. So what effect do you think Trump either winning or losing will have on the QAnon movement, like for both of them? What do you think will be the result?
So before I say anything, take my prediction with a pinch of salt, because as I said earlier, I totally got it wrong on the UK thing. So, my prediction is, and I think some of my co-hosts on the podcast actually disagree with me on this. This isn't the official QAnonAnonymous position, but I think that it will get more violent should Trump lose.
I agree, actually. But yeah, sorry, carry on. Tell me why.
Because I think that it will be seen as a last chance. It's your last chance to save. I mean, I'm talking in alt-right terms because this is the thing I've studied the most. But quite often, you'll see when people heroize, like alt-right terrorists or people who have killed, mass shooters and stuff like that. They'll often talk about it as a last stand to save Western civilization. And it's very difficult for me not to see QAnon seeing themselves in the same terms. Essentially, this is your moment right before things fall to the deep state forever, and they will continue forever. And I think for people who truly believe that, particularly very kind of vulnerable, it's nearly always mentally vulnerable people who, get preyed on to commit these kind of these acts, particularly in QAnon, actually, I think this will be an impetus, absolutely. My guess is if Trump wins, then we're going to see more of what we were talking about, just QAnon GOP. Just more QAnon congressmen, more QAnon senators, more kind of this flirting that they're doing with QAnon over the media. Is my guess, because they will want to, I think, kind of keep that momentum going for as long as they possibly can, and they won't want it to end with Trump.
For sure.
They want to feel like they're carrying on that sort of incredible amount of momentum for their next candidate.
I have to agree with you, actually. I'll support you against Julian and Jake. Under Democratic presidents, extremism tends to rise drastically. Under Clinton, obviously, we had the OKC bombing, and under Obama, hate groups increased their membership more than they had basically since Clinton. So having
yeah.
Democrats in power is a great motivator towards like membership of sort of far right movements, and I think it will be a great motivator for QAnon folks as well, who will just see the election as having been stolen by the deep state. And I think that that's a very precarious position to be in. I think it's definitely more likely because Trump's supposed to bring the Great Awakening, supposed to bring the storm, and if he's removed from power and fails to do that, I think people are a lot more likely to decide to take matters into their own hands. Not the entire movement, but those people who might be inclined to do so will be motivated towards it. Yeah. That's spooky. But just as spooky, I think, is them getting into government, because, you know, then you have, like, if you get any sort of decent amount of QAnon senators, you have the potential for sort of, you know, QAnon to have power in the government. Yeah.
Like satanic panic all over again, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is like a really terrifying thought.
And the satanic panic is super interesting, honestly. Just the way that it seems to go in cycles. I mean, it pretty much started with blood libel, and then moved on to like the witch hunts and so on, and then from the witch hunts on to sort of the satanic panic as we now know it, of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and yeah, and now we have QAnon, you know, from and it doesn't seem to be a narrative that's like ever really gone away, that there's this sort of secretive enemy that is in league with Satan and trying to harm children. Yeah, it's a tough one to shake from our culture. Anyway, yeah, we didn't have any takers for the questions, which is totally fine. We usually get a couple, but yeah. So we're just too good at talking. That's what it is. Yeah, no. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or shout out or what have you before we sort of wrap up?
No, I think I'm all really happy.
Awesome. Well, it's been like super awesome talking to you, Annie. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this with me.
Yeah, this is my first ever Twitch stream or Discord stream or whatever.
It's the only one you've ever done.
I guess I'm a Twitch thought now.
Yeah, Twitch thought Annie. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you very, very much. I'm gonna pop you out of the room now, and I'll have a little a short chat with chat, and then I'll probably raid us into somebody different. But yeah, I really, really appreciate it, and I hopefully we'll get to talk again at some point. But it's been really cool. Thanks, Annie.